Hi, and welcome back to Good Distinctions. I'm your host, Will Wright. And joining me today is Thomas Quackenbush of Floriani. Thomas, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Joy to be here.
I'd like to start out just very simply saying, who are you, Thomas, and then what is Floriani?
Great. Well, in that order, I am Thomas Quackenbush. So you got that right. Well done. um, I'm a member of Floriani. I'm a husband and father of four girls. I've got our first son coming at the end of April, so that's probably the most exciting part of my personal life currently. I grew up in Southern California and in the kind of orbit of Thomas Aquinas College, where my dad's been a tutor for about 30 years. And I was a high school teacher, math and science high school teacher for 7 years after graduating from college. Always loved to sing. And a few years ago, the Holy Spirit started pushing me in the direction of sacred music along with some classmates and friends. And so that led us to start Floriani, which is a professional men's vocal ensemble that we founded to revitalize sacred music and evangelize through sacred beauty. So we're based in Phoenix, Arizona, and we travel around the diocese and around the country and even around the world, reintroducing people to the vast treasury of sacred music, which spans, well before the time of Christ, all the way up to the present day. And we really try to crack the treasure chest open from the east and the west as well. And sometimes we are so bold as to blend the two together when it seems like a good idea. So,
Well, blending, breathing with both lungs. There's a fine line there, so it's all good.
Exactly.
You all came to St. John Paul II High School, where I teach, not too long ago. Did a great in-service with the Schola there, formation time with them, and a concert before. And one of the things that struck me, I mean, besides it being absolutely beautiful, I'd heard recordings of you all online, and I've always been a fan, but having you all come and perform in the church, these beautiful chants and hymns, what struck me is, and I can't remember exactly which chant it was, but it wasn't Latin, it wasn't Greek, it wasn't English, and it was almost 2,000 years old, or maybe more. Maybe I'm getting that wrong. Where do you find these? Because I've looked for these sorts of things, and I don't speak Aramaic, so maybe I'm just looking in the wrong places. But how did the group sort of find all of these pieces in the treasure chest?
They come from different sources. The one you're thinking of, I think, is Hebrew, and that one in particular we found because our founder, Giorgio, when he was in high school, he, as he tells the story, he was kind of became captivated or obsessed with the question of what music would have sounded like at the time of Christ. What melodies would Christ have been singing? And so he did some digging, and that's been the music of the Hebrew temple has been sort of a holy grail for musicologists. Frankly, I believe all the way back to about the 4th century. And that relates to the fact that the temple was destroyed in AD 70, and then the Hebrew people were spread throughout the world, and so there wasn't continuity of tradition in a certain sense, at least not for the temple. In fact, they forbade certain grand celebrations that would have been held in the temple out of a sign of mourning for the destruction of the temple. And so we have these biblical accounts of the Levitical choir and the temple orchestra and the metropolitan opera of the old world that the Hebrew temple was, but there's no record of what that would have sounded like, let alone just the chant of in the synagogue on a Sabbath. So looking into that, it turns out, as I said, people have been trying to find an answer to this question. In the 20th century, a couple of interesting things happened. There was a musicologist who took this question up, but particularly looking at one of the authoritative Hebrew scriptures called the Masoretic text. So it was the Masoretes were a sect that were dedicated to preserving, codifying and preserving in a very strict way the scriptures, which was an innovation in a sense for the Jews, because not having any vowels in the scripture, there was actually a lot of room for interpretation. And even at the time of the Masoretes, which is about the year 900 or so, I believe, there were already markings in the text that whose meaning was unknown. So cantillation marks, punctuation, there were different interpretations. Some of them were very well known. Some of the markings were not well understood, but they were preserved fastidiously over the centuries. And in the 20th century, this musicologist hypothesized that they were a musical score, that they actually were a form of notation based on hand gestures, chironomy, which was an ancient form of directing music. Now, this musicologist didn't know that in just a few decades, it would be confirmed that civilizations more ancient than the Jews actually notated music based on chironomy. So this was a bold claim she was making. It maybe even almost contemporaneously, other scholars were confirming it. Anyway, to make a long story short, she reverse engineered what the musical notation would have produced. And although she only transcribed some of it, we have some of her transcriptions. And the incredible thing is that for this psalm we sang that day at John Paul II, Psalm 114, the melody that you get from this ancient codex, based on this 20th century musicologist's theory, is almost identical to the melody that the Jews are still singing to this day for Psalm 114. And not only that, it's almost identical to the oldest known Gregorian chant melody, which is also for Psalm 114 and is known to date back to the time of Christ. So there's a musical score hidden in the Old Testament, and so that's the piece we sang is that piece, and it's one of the psalms that they would have sung at Passover. So it wouldn't have been on the last day of Passover, so it's probably not the hymn that our Lord sang right before going to the garden, but it likely is one of the psalms that he would have sung the few days before his passion with his disciples, which is pretty fantastic.
Absolutely. Well, and you all had a few different hymns from all throughout the last 2 millennia, and they were in different languages, different genres in a very real sense. And I think a lot of people who haven't studied chant, who haven't lived in that sort of culture or atmosphere, because that's what I think of it as anyway. I've been learning a lot in the last few years about chant, as well as singing it at the liturgy especially. But I didn't realize how expansive it was. I had always heard, okay, well, Gregorian chant. Well, that's a very particular thing. Certainly there's a lot to it. And of course, the official songbook of the church, so to speak, the Graduale Romanum, like our Roman chants are Gregorian chants. But then there's all these other types of chant and hymnody that have been used at liturgy and maybe not. So I guess, in your mind, how expansive is sacred music, and is it broader than simply what's at the liturgy?
That's a great question. Yeah, sort of. I guess the first place to start is just to say, what is sacred music? What does that mean?
Right.
And right off the bat, it's important to notice that we use sacred music. Maybe you could say capital S, sacred music, and lowercase s. We use it to mean liturgical music, which would be principally for the Mass, but also for the divine office. But then we also use it to mean more broadly music which is expressive of worship or something like that. And so properly speaking, sacred music is music set apart for and really composed for the liturgy, which is the sung worship of God in community that we have. And so in that sense, the sacred music in the Judeo-Christian sense goes back much farther than the time of Christ. That God's people have been singing his praise mostly to the Psalms, singing the text of the Psalms for 5,000 years. So in that sense, that's a narrower sense of sacred music, but even then, it's fairly vast. It doesn't just encompass Gregorian chant, because there is legitimate development and organic growth and gradual expansion of the canon and the styles that sacred music, liturgical music encompasses. You know, and one big innovation, as it were, in the whatever it was, the 8th or 9th century, was the introduction of the organ, which now has such an important place in sacred music. Okay, so sacred music is music that's composed for, is set apart to not just adorn the liturgy, but to participate in it. It's part of the liturgy, even if it's a subordinate part of the liturgy, and it has the same purpose as the liturgy, which is to glorify God and sanctify the people. And so it's music that God has given particular power through its participation in the liturgy to give unique glory to God, and also to sanctify, which is kind of awesome. Mm-hmm. It's incredible. So there's music which in a sense by God through the church, through tradition, has been set apart with this special power. But then now in that category, we can talk about the music that's Roman liturgical music, or Byzantine liturgical music, and in a certain sense, those are different. And there's I'm sure a good conversation to be had about when it's appropriate to have crossover, etc. But so there's different threads of sacred music for the different liturgies, for the different expressions of the Mass. Bishop Emeritus here in Phoenix, Bishop Olmsted, he referred to as religious music. So if you expand that category even more, and when we say sacred music, usually we're referring to that whole canon, principally liturgical music, but also all these other expressions. Then you get something which legitimately encompasses everything from Hebrew chant, 3,000-year-old Hebrew chant, to the hymns, the Appalachian sacred harp hymns, to music from the Orthodox Church, to even to things that are whose origins are in folk music. I'm thinking about Ukrainian folk music, but that's traditionally now associated with great feasts in the church, and so they've kind of accrued symbolism and meaning. So suddenly this category just kind of blows out of the water. And by the way, things like praise and worship music would fall into that category as well. Although in Floriani that's not our expertise, but all of that music that's expressive of our worship of God would be in that category.
I'm debating whether I want to go into the praise and worship music.
We can at some point. We don't have to right now, but it's a good question.
Oh, I think we should. But I want to touch on something you brought up about that the East and the West, and when it's okay to sort of mix, because I over the last few years I talk about this on Good Distinctions here all the time. So I love St. Stephen's Cathedral here in Phoenix, and right off of 51, the Ruthenian Cathedral, and I love the Divine Liturgy. The first time I went, I absolutely fell in love with the fact that it's almost entirely antiphoned between the priest and the deacon and the people. It's sung the whole time. I love the chant tones, even just the movement of it, like the Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. Like it stirs the soul. It's rugged. It's beautiful, transcendent. And I think one of the first times I was in the church, I was just sort of testing the acoustics, and I started chanting the Salve Regina, and I thought to myself, "Oh, I want to make sure nobody's around," and mixing my East and the West. I'm joking, but at the same time, it's this odd sort of thing where, because the Latin Rite is so big, there's this tendency, at least historically in the past 150 years, of stifling the East in certain ways. That's why we have the Eastern Code of Canon Law, of course, is to protect the Eastern rites from being Latinized. So I definitely have seen it that direction, but I'd love to get more of your thoughts on that. And is there sort of an issue with using Byzantine chant maybe in the Roman liturgy, or how does that work?
Yeah, I think you're right that the principal concern has historically been, and even relatively recently, retaining the Eastern character of the of the Byzantine liturgy. And my sister actually just married the son of a Byzantine priest this past summer, so I had some good chats at the wedding with them. And so my brother-in-law's brother is about to be ordained a priest in the Byzantine church, and he was sharing the experience of in the Roman church we have the liturgy wars, or the battles within parish culture, and there's often a generational divide. And he said that in a sense that same thing happens in the Byzantine church, but the older generations were part of a Latinized culture, and so what the fight that they're working through is trying to reclaim their Eastern devotionals, Eastern music, the language, etc. So yeah, so I don't know that I think there's a lingering tendency to have Latin elements in the Byzantine church, but the movement of the church is away from that. I think in my experience being a Roman Catholic is that myself and many people I've talked to feel a lack, and therefore a yearning for what you mentioned, that there's something transcendent, something really moving about the music, but not at a superficial level, not at emotion, not at an emotional saccharine is maybe the wrong word, not in a way that just makes me feel like, yes, Lord, me pouring myself out, but diving into some deep liturgical spiritual current. And I think we associate that with the East because to a certain extent we have this sense that what they have is more unbroken, more rooted, more grounded. And even when it's not true, we feel that way. So a lot of, their melodies, their psalm tones, a lot of it's, folk music. It's simple things they kind of came up with. They're not of ancient origin, again, because a lot of it was lost. So as a Roman Catholic, we have this desire for that kind of transcendent sense. And one way we can get it, and, get a quick fix is by making our chant sound Eastern, just appropriating something of that cool, epic, mystical Eastern sound into our chants. And I do think there's it's important to notice that, both because it helps you notice the thing you're yearning for, but it's also important to notice that, at least speaking for myself, I want to rediscover that in the Roman tradition, and the church has said pretty clearly that there is Roman chant. There is music that's appropriate for and designed for and intended to be part of the Roman liturgy, instruments that are appropriate for the Roman liturgy, texts that are appropriate for the Roman liturgy, and not by any means that we shouldn't compose new pieces, right? But just to notice if we're drifting off and just trying to recreate something we heard in the East and bring it here instead of just rediscovering our own tradition.
No, I love that, and it's very intentional that way, where it's not just sort of copycatting, but saying, okay, what do we have? Because it's not like these things are hidden. Like I brought up that Hebrew chant, that was hidden in a lot of ways. These are things that we had to find. They had to be sort of resurrected in a sense. The Graduale Romanum and the Graduale Simplex don't have to be reconstructed. We have them. They're right there.
Right.
So it's and that's of course not everything, but that's the preference of the church for the place to start.
Yeah, and we're really still in a transition time. That those chants were rediscovered, 100 years ago in a certain sense, 100 and whatever, 50, 20, 130 years ago. That process was beginning, and so there isn't a widespread expertise of practice, specifically for chant. There's certainly not a widespread application of the music. So we're simultaneously trying to make chant cool again, right? That's we want people to have the same visceral response. Ideally, you walk into any we'll just say it's a pretty good, that is well executed musically and liturgically, a pretty good Roman Catholic Mass. Wouldn't it be amazing if a person walked in and had the same experience that Joe off the street who walks into that well-executed Byzantine liturgy is going to have? That's going to take beautiful art in beautiful churches with beautiful vestments and beautiful music, and all of them happening with beautiful choreography and reverence, faithfulness, without an air of casualness. And the word that I think the church prefers when talking about these things, when she writes about them, is integrated. All of these things must be integrated and properly ordered. And so the sacred arts of architecture and painting and sculpture and whatever you would call the sacred art of sewing vestments and whatever else, and candle making, all of those are subordinate to and lower than the sacred art of music. And that's because the music is participating in the liturgy actively. It's part of the liturgy. Its material are the sacred texts. But sacred music is subordinate to the liturgical action which is taking place at the altar. And so all of those things have to be properly ordered, and that means the liturgy has to come first, and there has to be a right understanding of the end of the liturgy. But I think it's possible, and I think I'm experiencing it more than I ever have, especially than when I was a slightly younger man growing up in Southern California. There was significantly less of these things happening there 15, 20 years ago.
I will say, I went to Southern California on vacation one time, and I popped into this little church in Huntington Beach, and it was one of the most beautiful, lively, traditional masses I've ever been to. I was shocked.
Praise God. Praise God.
20 minutes away, not the same experience at daily mass. So you definitely don't get that sort of, we'll call it universality between the different liturgies. But the way I like to put it with people is that we shouldn't be singing at mass. We should be singing the mass. That's what, as you're saying, like, that's why sacred music is so part and parcel of the liturgy, because we should be singing the texts of the mass. Like, for example, I know that before we started recording, we sort of alluded to this fact that neither one of us have really been living in this culture and environment of chant and sacred music for very long. About, I guess, almost 10 years ago, 9 or 10 years ago now, I was just beginning to work at a parish, and I was hired as the director of catechesis, and our director of music left the day after Christmas, and I was supposed to start on New Year's Day. And so the pastor came to me and said, well, you play music, so you're going to be director of music now, or director of liturgy, and you'll help us find a music director. And I said, okay, sure. How the heck do I do that? Like, so I had to read the general instruction of the Roman Missal. I had to reread Sacrosanctum Concilium within the first week, because I was like, okay, I got to learn this job, and I want to do it right.
By the way, that
I
probably,
make sure,
having read those, probably puts you head and shoulders above most other music directors in the country who have probably.
Unfortunately, I
don't
learned
know
that
for a fact, but
no, I think that's safe. That's a safe assumption. But at the time, I was also doing a life team style liturgy at another parish next door. I was playing guitar and singing, and we had a drummer and all these different things. And I had been doing that since I was in high school. So that was, I grew up in North Carolina, and it was a very, I don't want to say Protestantized mass. I mean, the priests were faithful. They were doing the text of the liturgy. But I definitely didn't understand the differences in instrumentation when it comes to liturgy. I didn't understand. I didn't know anything about Roman sacred music. It wasn't even on my radar. I'd never been introduced to it. And so when I started this job, I'm doing the sort of praise and worship style music at one of the liturgies. And then at the other masses, I'm doing, I'll call it the 70s, 80s gather hymnal type stuff that they had been doing. And we moved gradually towards more 1800s English hymns, sort of Anglican hymns, which I love. I mean, I was baptized Anglican, and
Awesome.
I still have a heart for that. So
as a side note, we just yesterday spent about an hour singing singing Anglican chant and working our way through the notation.
Beautiful.
So yeah, we're all about
That's
it.
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, and that's another thing that I think the Roman Church can rediscover now is because of the personal ordinariates, we have this connection again,
Yep.
where we can sort of take all these things that have sort of been held hostage in this Protestant milieu and bring it back into authentically English chant, which is so exciting.
Yes.
But to make a long story short, we started moving towards a little bit more traditional hymnody. And then at one point, at one mass, we instituted ad orientem posture of the priest and Latin chant for the mass parts. And I was still playing guitar and praise and worship music while also adding the entrance, offertory, and communion antiphons in English. It was a mess. Like, it was all over the place. And I held that for about 5 or 6 months, and I didn't want to change anything because we finally had these things. And now that I'm learning about it, I'm like, okay, like, I need to do this. And I had a parent come up to me at that mass and say, can you please stop being bipolar and just pick a lane? If you want us to learn how to chant, we'll do it. Like, can we just do one or the other? And so I was like, okay, fine. And so gradually we let the guitar go, and I haven't picked it up again for liturgy. Praise be to God. I'm still atoning. We can talk about instrumentation later, but
yes,
we started doing the entrance antiphon with the verses, and we started doing the offertory and the communion antiphon with the verses. We did the Mass 8 Gloria and the Sanctus that everyone knows from Jubilate Deo. Like, we started doing these things, and people loved it. They were really grasping onto it. And so I've seen that motion both on a parish level as well as an individual level.
Mm-hmm.
But I continue to learn so much on my own just by reading things like Charlie Solicitudini from Pope Pius X and Musicum Sacrum and Sacrosanctum Vincilium and a lot of other things, even more recent things. You mentioned Bishop Olmsted. I mean, Bishop Olmsted has a great document on sacred music. Archbishop Sample from Oregon has a great document that summarizes
the church
a lot
has
of
written
these things.
A lot about these things. I mean,
so why don't people know it? And like, how did you get into it?
Well, you invited me on this podcast, and I've just been cramming. No, I'm just kidding. So really, I dove in head first. As I mentioned, I think before we started, I didn't study sacred music. I sang at home with my family growing up, just hymns during the different liturgy. We have our little Advent hymnal and our Lenten hymnal and Christmas and Easter, and we'd sing every night. And then I started singing at for Mass at our parish, and it was everything you said, everything from electric keyboard from the choir loft that had a beautiful pipe organ just sitting there, and we weren't using.
It's a travesty.
This is the old mission in Ventura, so it's like a historic church, historic pipe organ, and we have the the keyboard, to the little drum box and the whole thing. And even at that time, I wasn't really a fan of that, but all we did is just try to sing as reverently as we could. And then in high school, got into singing at a public high school, singing in a chamber choir, and that's where I really actually first started singing beautiful sacred music. And so I loved it, and continued singing in choirs, etc. But my desires were all over the place. I played baseball. I wanted to be a teacher. I went to Thomas Aquinas College and studied philosophy and theology. And being, really studying sacred music was never at the top of my priorities. And then, as I said, a few years ago, we decided to take this plunge and quit our jobs and create this ensemble. And so part of that has been the jumping into the deep end in the liturgy, in what the church teaches about sacred music, and then also just the practice of learning an art form that isn't well established in a certain sense. So we have one of our mentors is a this is maybe a little off topic. So I'll just say, getting into like, what does the church say? That's still a process. That's going back and taking time away from rehearsal and basically running a small business and saying, trying to ground ourselves what the church is saying and realizing this is not a matter of reading the one or two times the church just said, we should probably think about the music. I mean, that would be what you'd expect based on going to mass, over the last 25 years is the church must not have really said much because it's just kind of pastors just hire a music director. And for the most part, it was kind of like the music director figures it out. You do the thing. It's not really, the hymns should be related to the theme that you can slap onto the readings. That's kind of the model. So I do think it's pretty incredible when you start reading what the church has said. Forget the specific prescriptions, and a lot of that changes it's disciplinary and not doctrinal. So, you mentioned tralala sollicitudine, which is, anyway, saying that, vernacular is forbidden. Absolutely.
Right.
Well, obviously that's changed.
Yeah.
So,
huge debates
it's
in the
important.
50s and 60s. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's important when you read, go back and read these things. It's not, you can't say like, well, this document says women may never be involved in sacred music. Well, that's not true anymore. Disciplinary things can change. But the thing that comes up more than the particular requirements of the church for me is the care that she's taken to reason carefully through what sacred music is, what its place is, and how it should be executed and why, and that's all grounded in man, his nature, and his end. And so there's something. It's just beautiful to be part of a church, be part of the church that does this kind of thing. Careful reasoning, deeply rooted in what matters most. But it also means you can't write it off what the church says. It's very, very clear over the last however long she's been writing about this that this is of high importance to the church, and that it's not a matter of personal preference, and it's not a matter of, well, this is what helps me pray more, or this is what helps my, in this culture, these people, helping people enter into the liturgical mysteries is absolutely part of it. So that's going to be taken into consideration, but not in the form of personal preference, but in a somewhat more objective consideration of the interplay between real development and innovation in musical style combined with faithfulness to what's been received and handed down, which is just the story of the liturgy. And so the project of the sacred musician, asking the question, what is the church asking for, is about docility and then faithful practice, to be able to execute sacred music to the greatest extent possible.
Well, and it does take effort. I mean, it takes effort to be able to put away those sort of vestiges of the last few decades. And I'm convinced that the uphill battle is not going to come from the pews. It's coming from the publishing houses. I mean, OCP
100%.
and GIA are the reason that we still have a 4-hymn sandwich as our liturgical model.
Oregon Communist Press. Wait, sorry.
This is public, you know that, right? No, I'm just kidding.
You said you can edit afterwards. Hey, okay.
I'm not editing that. Never. No, I completely agree. I've said worse things. It makes me angry, in a sense, like righteously angry, to think about these publishers. They have to know. I mean, it's not like it's hidden. If you try for a second in 2024 with Google to just look for Catholic sacred music, the documents will come up.
Yep.
So to read them and then say, well, we're going to keep doing this thing anyway, is just willfully, to some extent, prideful and malicious. I can't see any other. Like, I try so hard on this podcast to be middle of the road, and like where good distinctions are the spice of life. That's our tagline. It's about
That's right.
finding
That's
the
right.
virtuous middle. But hear it now, folks. There's no virtuous middle when it comes to OCP and GIA hijacking sacred music. It's not what Jesus wants.
Amen.
I'm
Now,
sure of
here's
that.
here's the way you can take that to the virtuous middle is the seamy underbelly of bureaucracy is that it's not a person. And so it's a self-perpetuating form of tyranny. And so
No, that's fair.
I have no idea who's involved in GIA or CP. You could replace them all tomorrow, and it would probably continue on the same way because and this is going to be true of any organization. You have people who are just filling job descriptions, and their job is to, contact the parish and see if they want to order the next thing. And that parish's job is to just say yes, because it'd be easier to do that than it would be to go check out Source and Summit. Phoenix's own Adam Bartlett's outfit is doing a great thing.
Well, I
and
was
there are
going to bring
others as
up
well.
Adam.
But yeah. So anyway, but not to just a knock on them, but yeah, there's a lot of inertia at those levels that, and so then you're dealing with questions not just of education or of recalibrating people's aesthetic opinions, or aesthetic responses, but you're talking about just the inertia of budgets and habits, and who's in what positions of power with the USCCB's conference on whatever, even though they keep having to say, like, that's a heretical hymn, you can't have that one in your hymn book, strike that one. But that being said, I mean, I don't know about you, but for me, looking back over the last 10, 15 years, you don't see it any moment to moment, but all of a sudden you look around and there are, forget the organizations that are doing good work in parishes. There are more parishes in the situation you described, of this kind of schizophrenic, goofy hymn, but they do the goofy hymn after singing the proper antiphon. Right. Just that alone is that's fantastic. Mm-hmm. And one of Floriani's earliest experiences, this is ancient history, we were a college school at the time. This is before we became a professional group. We sang for Bishop Barron. He was the bishop in Santa Barbara at the time, and it was a mass, something to do with preparation for the youth synod or the synod on synods, about synods, or there was some synod happening, right? So it was a listening thing, and there was a mass associated with it for the youths. And so Floriani was asked to sing one part, and there was a band that was doing the other parts. And the most poignant point of contrast came, I don't remember which part of the mass, but I think it was after the Agnus Dei or something. There's just a moment where we finished singing sacred chant, done excellently, and then the band had to strike up again, and it was so jarring. So there's a certain sense in which that kind of incongruity over time is going to inevitably lead people towards picking sides, and the side that's going to be picked, I think, because of the generations that are coming up in the church, but also just because it's objectively more beautiful, is going to be the side that the church is proposing as her music. So I have a lot of hope. It's just going to take time.
Well, and objectively more beautiful because it matches what the church says that sacred music ought to be. Sort of intuitively. It's not something that we need to sort of reinvent or make it our own. The sort of timeless, transcendent quality that people are looking for, that exploration of the mystery. Because the way that it was explained, that it made the most sense to me, was actually Adam Bartlett. And so I'm glad you brought him up. He described the distinction between liturgical music, properly speaking, and devotional. Liturgical being that it comes from God, we make it our own, and then we offer it back in song, which is very liturgical action.
It's like
and
the
then
Psalms.
devotional,
it's the Psalms.
Right. Well, and it's scripture. It's almost always scripture, literally the word of God. Whereas devotional is something that's rising from the heart up to God. It's not bad by any means, but it's not liturgical, properly speaking. I mean, I
100%.
was shocked. I was literally shocked when I found out that hymns are not proper to the liturgy, like
Oh, they're
the
not
mass, liturgy of the
yeah, right.
mass.
Yeah, not proper
It's
to
the
that.
liturgy of the
Exactly.
hours. And
Exactly. Yep.
I was like, what? My
It
whole,
makes so much sense.
it
Yeah,
does. Yeah.
I 100 absolutely agree. I think that's a very clear and powerful way of putting it. That all religious music, that's the big category, is expressive of prayer. It's expressive of worship. But sacred music is expressive. You're expressing words that have been given to you by the church
Mhm.
for this particular action, you know. And there's something so great about it. Someone described it once as the experience you have as a parent when you teach your child something, and then they say, "Daddy, look, or I can do it," and then they do it for you, and you just delight in them. You're not going, "Wow, where did you come up with that? That's incredible. You're amazing." God's not going like nice rhyming scheme, like I love the drum, like the whatever it was, or even in the St. Thomas's hymns, right? The great hymns for Corpus Christi. Those have merit not because God's going to be so impressed at his poetical abilities or something like that. Um, God delights in us literally just doing the thing he told us to do back
Right.
to him, and
Right.
saying the words he told us to say back to him because they're him.
You brought up rhythm, and the other part of that's so interesting to me, and I hadn't thought about this. And every time I explain this to someone, it's like a light bulb goes off. Is that hymnody, by its nature, is metered. It's something that you have this many syllables, you have this sort of scheme, and the words have to fit into it. So you can have the same tune and have 4 or 5 different versions of the text, depending on the liturgical season, all these different things. And that's great. It is what it is. But with chant, it's words first, music second, rather than music first, words second. And so a good chant will reflect that. Like even in the beginning of the Salve Regina that most people know is like Salve Regina. The reason that Regina is the highest because that means queen, right? It
Yeah,
would be
right,
very
right.
odd to sing Salve Regina.
Yeah, right.
Like, who's going to do that?
Yeah, right.
I mean, maybe if she literally walked in the door and you're saying Hail Queen, but
I also love the "Ed ascendi in cielo." You'll often hear the word painting in those chants. Yeah.
Well, and that's what St. Augustine was getting at when he said that to sing is to pray twice. It's this elevation and prolongation of the word. People always back in my praise and worship days, we would extend that and say, "He who rocks prays thrice," and I'm still atoning for that little quip as well. But
That's so funny.
these are well-intentioned musicians, well-intentioned people trying to do what they believe they ought to do. But like once we finally start understanding, okay, why is this not appropriate for Mass? Why is the church asking us for something else? And we start understanding that it's not our word, it's Christ's word through us and offering it back. It's that liturgical act of worship. I mean, how do we get two people who are sort of on the fence, so to speak? They love praise and worship music. They understand that chant is what the church is asking for, or not even chant, but like the propers even. The antiphons. How do we help people understand that the sort of idea of time and place?
Yeah. Well, two things. First, I think it's important to say that chant does have pride of place, but even more so, we're not just talking about that. It would be best to just sing all of the Gregorian chants, like that's as though that's the change that needs to happen. Is whatever is happening, that's not what the church wants. She wants this form of the chant, and so yeah, so it really will genuinely, legitimately have different expressions in different parishes and different communities, even as to the extent that it's all docile and subordinated to the tradition of the church. And so in an ideal world, it would be, much of it would be Gregorian, revered, if not totally used all the time. But okay, but your question, so so I'll give you the answer that Floriani has, which is principally, I think we need to show people. I think that people have, I said this to my mom the other day because my mom and I will often butt heads about this, and I don't think we actually really disagree. But I get fiery and say things in absolute terms, and so there are a lot of people. I don't mean this to be condescending at all, because I fall into this camp in a certain sense. There are a lot of people who have been devout, faithful Catholics, deeply holy people who, through the grace of God, will probably be in heaven quicker than many others. Who've been attending Mass, love Jesus in the Eucharist, and the soundtrack, for lack of a better word, of that experience, of that holy life, has been music which I think an objective analysis would say is not really fitting for the Mass. And I think that, as a side note, there are a lot of people who have probably been prevented from truly entering into a relationship with the church and therefore Christ, because it's clear that things aren't being taken very seriously. But putting that aside, there are people who genuinely have, and the soundtrack for that experience has been, and the hymns and the meditations, that's been this kind of music. Okay, so for those people, there's an enormous emotional, psychological barrier. And I was only in it for a little while. I still have a nostalgia for hymns that I really don't like, if that makes any sense. So
I feel you. I'm with you. Yeah.
So and not just that I don't approve, that I think, well, that really shouldn't be used, but I love it. It's more like, that song, but it stirs something in my soul of like, that's Mass as a child. That's what childhood relationship with Christ was like. So I don't think it's effective to first argue or say, well, things should be different and you shouldn't do it this way, you should do it this way. And beauty is by nature attractive, right? That's the best way to define something which is transcendental. So I think that the best thing we can do is start presenting integrated liturgical experiences to people, which requires the participation of the priest, obviously. I mean, he needs to be on board. In a way where you're not, even if your ultimate hope is to bring the church to something more beautiful, like, I don't have all the answers. I don't know what it's ultimately going to look like. What's the Novus Ordo going to look like in 50 years? I don't know. It's not going to be what I think it should be. I can almost guarantee that. It's going to be something more beautiful. It's going to be better. It'll probably have more Anglican chant. I don't know. So it's not about, but it is about presenting something integrated and beautiful to people who maybe haven't seen it before, or if they have, it hasn't been done well because there's not enough people doing it well. And then that gives people the opportunity to say, wow, what was that? What were you doing? I have this, like we were talking about the Byzantine experience, right? And then you have the opportunity to say, isn't the church awesome? This is just the music. This is just what the church wants us to do. And every Mass could be like this. This could be what we're doing. In fact, that's what the church is asking of us. When people experience priests singing the parts of the Mass, you say that's what the church asks them to do. They just haven't given them the resources and the nudge. There's just been a lack of formation. So that's kind of Floriani's answer, is first give the experience, and not just in liturgies, but then in concerts, to kind of expand, blow people's minds and expand their conception of what religious music can be. Because for most people, it really is like boring old medieval whatever, although medieval music's super cool. People don't know, but whatever. Boring classical music is probably what people think, or praise and worship, 80s OCP, whatever. So they say, no. There's more than you could possibly imagine. And the church also admits of, I'm getting on a tangent, don't get me excited, but the church admits of legitimate development. So over and over again, you'll see things like, you see her say things like, describing the progression from the liturgical chant, the Gregorian chant, which, by the way, came from the church in Jerusalem, right? So this is the kind of the chant of, in a sense, I mean, it's of a very ancient origin. This is not a medieval innovation. So simple plain chant, which was then adorned with the organ and blossomed into polyphony, and has grown into modern expressions, which are not like Renaissance polyphony, and they're not like Gregorian chant right at the surface, but they're legitimate and they're beautiful, right? So there's going to be a wide variety of music that is, proposed by the church as being not second best, but beautiful and, very fitting. Okay, but as she says this, she also says, can't you see how important it is for us to be very, very careful that we don't allow corruption and ugliness and other things into this thing, which is so precious and so important because it's part of the liturgy? Isn't it important to put up guardrails? Isn't it important to think very carefully? Isn't it important not to admit instruments to the Mass that everyone knows are secular or for entertainment? They're profane, not bad, just not sacred. See, so and if you just say that, you say, well, that would make sense. This is really important, and it's set aside for its own purpose, and all this stuff. And so yeah, it would totally make sense. We shouldn't have instruments that everyone says, well, that's like a theater instrument, or that's from a rock band. And that's exactly what you see, starting with the piano all the way up through even at some points in time an orchestra or a string ensemble. These things would not be appropriate for the Mass because they would occur to the faithful as being profane and secular. And that's the whole story of bands and piano. So there are going to be some things that are, for the most part, but not exclusively, forbidden now. Maybe we might be past the time of forbidding completely, but there are things which are very, very, very hard to have present in the liturgy in a way that doesn't evoke something outside of this sacred space. So, okay, so giving people that experience, giving them, letting them see it, letting them experience it, and then planting that desire in their hearts. I think that's the most powerful thing. I think that if you have someone on the fence who's aware of what the church says, then at that point, it's not going to be a matter of convincing. It's going to be a matter of saying, hey, this is what the church is asking for. There are going to be different legitimate expressions, so it's not a matter of just saying you got it. But if the church says we should sing the antiphons, we should sing the antiphons. And I think that over time, people who are willing to be docile to the church are going to experience the fruits of that. And that's what the other thing the church says is the fruits of good sacred music are born in the lives of the faithful. So good sacred music produces good fruits in the lives of the faithful. And I think we're seeing that in the church now. So,
well, and I want to commend you and the rest of the members of Floriani for doing what you're doing, because I think by showing people, you're giving them a glimpse of something that maybe they'll never experience again in their lifetime. I mean, if we're being realistic, but they have it, they can capture it, and they can sort of allow that to percolate and contemplate what could be. And then it leads to small gradual changes. As one thing I thought of quite a bit when I was at the parish was how violent, in a certain sense, the implementation of the Novus Ordo was. And not even the implementation of the Novus Ordo, but even the 5 years or so preceding between the council and 1970, there were all sorts of things being done that were illegitimate, that bishops were saying, well, I'm hearing stirrings from the Vatican, so we should go ahead and, rip out the altar rails and turn the altars around and put the English, put the Latin, or do it with Latin. Let's get some vernacular, like all these different things. Totally illegitimate. They weren't being asked to do that. They were doing it on their own. So to go back, even if it's going in a good direction, even if it's going towards something that's what the church is asking for, to do that abruptly without solid catechesis would be doing people a disservice.
A great example of that would be, in my opinion, we're guilty of this sometimes, because again, when you're shooting for a target, they're going to be, you're not trying to do the thing perfectly at every moment, because you're trying to give, again, open people to the concept. So I think that people totally misunderstand active participation and what that means. I like at concerts, I like to, when there's one piece in particular, I want people to pray along with us. And so I'll always begin by just saying, so this next piece is going to require active participation from all of you. And everyone looks nervous, like they're going to have to sing. I say, no, I don't want you to make any noise. I just want you to kind of unite your heart, unite your intellect and your heart with this prayer that right? That's active participation. Sometimes it's singing too, obviously, but the Latin chants can be, I think that when they are just a sort of unintelligible spiritual experience, and I think a lot of people really like chant for that very reason. They enjoy just having chant on. When the liturgical chant is just that, and when everyone's kind of satisfied with that, or if that's the status quo, that is, I don't think that goes as far as being an abuse, but that's very, very explicitly not the intention of the church. The church doesn't necessarily want everyone to sing all of the chants at every mass of every level of solemnity, but active participation, I think sometimes we bend the stick the other way. We're like, you guys, idiots, you think it means you have to sing all the time. It doesn't mean you don't have to sing ever. It's like, no, actually, yes, you do have to sing. The church wanted more people singing more of the mass, and the church really wanted people to be cognizant of and actively contemplating the texts of the prayers. And the challenge that was facing was like no one knows Latin anymore, right? The language had died out, and so they bent the stick the other way. Implementation and made it all English. Anyway, so I guess my point is, there's more than just an aesthetic opening up. And Adam Bartlett's a great example of this. And we talked about Anglican chant and Floriani's passion. I don't know how it's going to happen, but we don't want to lose the Gregorian propers. They're so beautiful. They have, the sounds of them echoed in churches across the world for 1,500 years. It would be just a poverty if they were not done anymore, because we need to understand the text. So we don't see the total path. We don't see how it's going to play out. But my experience of singing the chant is now, and I'm not fluent in Latin, so it's, with the help of a translation, obviously, but if I'm in Mass, I'm familiar with the melodies, I'm familiar with the text. Sometimes I'm singing along. I probably shouldn't be if I'm in the congregation, because I'm not part of the schola, but I'll sing along little bits. They're familiar, and the words are intelligible to me, and I'm praying them with the choir. That will take real work over time, and probably won't be the norm in most parishes. But anyway, I guess
what could be the norm is exactly what Sacrosanctum Concilium asked for, which is that the use of Latin be retained. But they also point out, it might have not be in Sacrosanctum Concilium, it might have been in another document, but they point out exactly which of the mass parts ought to be in Latin and sung by everyone.
Yes,
it was very, very clear.
Yeah,
I have yet to hear a parish do the credo.
Oh, really?
Latin.
Come to St. Anne's. I need
to come. I never come to the East Valley, but I know it can be done. But even like the Mass Eight Gloria, that's a challenging piece for someone who doesn't know Latin, doesn't know the pronunciations,
right.
Doesn't know sort of exactly how to do it. But once they get it, it's like, and Adam Bartlett talks about this too, it's like an atmosphere that you live in. And then you sort of you bring it into yourself, and you start to live it as well.
Yes,
because there is a pathway for it. I'm completely on board with you about this active participation question. In fact, it's I wrote a research proposal. I'm intending to start a PhD here shortly.
Oh, awesome!
As long as they say yes, I'm
it
still
says
waiting.
You should enjoy your your 4-year journey
Yes.
to get your PhD, those 5 years will be the best 7 years of your life.
There you go. There you go. It's gonna be 4, okay? It's gonna be 4.
Okay.
We'll see.
I believe you.
But the proposal was, I started working with my advisor, and I realized no one's answered this question of what active participation actually is. People use it in all sorts of different ways. And so my question, what I'm investigating, will be defining active participation using the Paschal mystery as an interpretive key. So I'm interested to see what God does with that and sort of where the research leads, but it's
gotta be scary to
absolutely
write
this
a
middle.
theological. I mean, you're like, I wonder how deep this pool is. It's like, well, like check back after eternity, and you'll still be swimming down into the depths. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Keep going into the abyss, and eventually I'll come back up for air, or maybe I'll die down there. I don't know.
That's right.
At least I'll be in the Lord's water, hopefully. But it's so interesting because even in my preliminary research, what I found was that the Society of St. Pius X, for example, in an irregular communion with us, and it's a very strange thing, their theological opinion, which is wrong, it's heretical, is that the Mass is simply the cross. And I found this fascinating, that it's not the resurrection, it's not the whole Paschal mystery. In fact, the term Paschal mystery was only coined in the 1950s. Of course, the concept is as old as the church.
Right.
But this idea of the Mass being the self-offering to the Son and to the Father in the Spirit, in which we're invited to synergistically take part, like that's there, but they see it as the cross and only the cross.
So as opposed to the cross, the incarnation, the cross, the resurrection,
right? Everything.
Yeah.
But that has huge repercussions, because like if you're talking to somebody who is inclined to praise and worship music, I've heard this a lot, especially from more traditionalist folks. It's like, would you play that song at the foot of Calvary? And I think there's a fun little contemplation there of,
would you play it at the resurrection? Yeah.
But would I play it at the resurrection? So if it's after Mass, which maybe people don't even know this, there is no recessional hymn in the rubrics. It doesn't exist.
Mass is just over.
Right. So if you want to party it up and do your praise and worship song, full out, no drums, of course, but like, maybe there's an argument there. But it's so interesting if we go to these extremes of saying, well, it's only the cross. Well, that's not true. I think some people are saying, well, it needs to be a celebration. It needs to be just the resurrection in a sense. They're not saying that. They're not using that terminology. But I think they are swinging that way. Whereas the truth is very much in the middle.
Well, yeah, or it's all encompassing.
It's both. Yeah, it's all of it.
It's not partly this and it's all of this and all of that. And I wonder if that's a really interesting point, because one way that my brother-in-law, Byzantine brother-in-law, characterized this was he just said the Roman Rite emphasizes and is focused upon the sacrifice, and the cross. I think that's true. I think aesthetically, and in the prayers and the way that it, and the Eastern Church is focused on the resurrection, and so it's going back to the breathing with two lungs. At every level, there's kind of, it's a both and, with different emphasis, and that's what it seems to me unavoidable when you have an infinite mystery like this. We aren't capable of just encompassing everything all the time. We just can't do it. Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. I think that's maybe one reason why you have to have other principles when choosing music and thinking about the liturgy. If it were up to us, if we had to come up with something that would suit the Paschal mysteries, we'd just be up a creek without a paddle, right? We don't have the capacity. Somehow there's this mysterious interplay of the past of humans created all of this sacred music, right? It's all us, and at the same time, it's through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit with the Church over time, and so yeah, I guess in confronting that question of what would you play at the foot of the cross, or at the Last Supper, or at the resurrection, like, well, I don't know, but I feel like we should just go with what the church tells. Like, would
Exactly
you
right.
dare to just say, like, I wrote a song, like, that's what I'm going to sing at the foot of the cross? Like, I don't know. I would prefer it if someone said, you know what, like, we vetted this one, like the Lord has told me that you can sing this one at the foot of the cross. Like, yes, thank you, I'll do that.
Right. Well, and so I guess my picking up that other thought of the gradual change, the gradual change. So if somebody's listening to this and they're a music director, or they're someone who is involved in picking music for the liturgy, you can start with tweaks. You don't have to go full bore towards the perfect.
Well, please do
Um,
start with tweaks. Don't, yeah,
right,
yeah,
right. So,
please. Yeah.
well, and also it needs to be done well, because I have heard small ensembles and scholas who weren't prepared properly, and it sounded like a funeral dirge. It wasn't well chanted. It was awful, and it was
Yep.
distracting, and that's the
And
last thing you want.
start with simple. I mean, the church has
Right.
a vision for, let's just take a diocese. The big, beautiful, spectacular liturgies happen with the Schola Musica or whatever, happen at the cathedral. And the cathedral sets the musical tone for the diocese, and that's where you go to see pomp and circumstance, where you'd see
Mm-hmm.
pontifical mass, where you'd see beautiful vespers, where you'd hear the full choir and the schola and everything. And there'll be other parishes with means to pay musicians and to train them and to implement that. And then, but you know, we talk about the gradualis simplex, like, but also for even the most humble parish, um, the church wants beautiful sacred music, and that's going to look very, very different than it will at the cathedral. And so part of what a music director's responsibility is to take stock of the musical ability that's present in the parish, um, to take stock of the current liturgical sensibility and level
Mm-hmm.
of, you know, of reverence and or I should say choreography, for lack of a better word. You know, how seriously is that being taken right now? And put all those things together, and that usually looks like changing or adding or switching one, or you know, a few things at a time. So
Well, in my experience, it's not even always changing the choice of music. Like, for example, if I'm playing "Be Thou My Vision," something like that, a hymn,
mm-hmm.
very beautiful, love it. If I'm playing that with a band and there's a drummer, here's an interesting tweak: fire the drummer. There we go.
Right,
There's our first
right,
tweak. Doesn't change anything about the hymn. Doesn't change the way that you would play it on the guitar or the piano or sing it. But
mm-hmm.
just getting rid of the rhythm instrument that is absolutely secular. It's profane. Maybe we should talk about the difference between secular and profane again. You
Yeah,
mentioned it. It's
yeah,
that it's not sacred music. It's
right,
made for outside of the church, outside of the liturgy. So that's all we
right.
mean by that. It's not like
Yes,
it's
yes.
explicit and terrible and awful.
Yeah,
It has its
profane and
place.
heretical do not mean the same thing.
Right. But you can get rid of the drums. You can not play electric guitar.
mm-hmm.
Like, maybe have a light finger picking instead of strumming. Like, these are little changes
Yeah,
that would be almost imperceptible to the person in the pew, but
yep,
it's moving in the right direction.
yep. And the right
And then
direction,
also,
for clarity, is the human voice,
right,
um,
right.
unaccompanied. And then the organ is permitted as a beautiful adornment, but even then is meant to be below and supporting the human voice.
Well, and I'm really glad you brought that up, because the organ was a profane
Yes.
instrument.
Yep. Yep.
So, I mean,
Yep.
it's like, how far back do you want to go in the tradition? Because the organ was absolutely a secular, profane instrument. They brought it into the churches, and people had a conniption.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
the operas and the masses that were being written sounded almost the same. If you brought any instrument into the Eastern Church, they'd kick you right out.
Yep.
I mean, it's just not part of the tradition.
And they
But
haven't, and like we talked about, it's not like they've suffered in different ways, but their liturgies are spectacular. They do not,
mhm.
there's no sense in which you go, you know what this needs? Pipe organ.
And I do love the pipe organ, but But why? Why is the organ appropriate? So I guess this is one thing I think we should touch on is instrumentation. We've kind of danced around it a lot, but like, why? Why is organ okay? And why is piano or guitar not preferred?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that it was a profane instrument through a kind of a historical analysis. And at the time, I'm not sure. I don't know what the actual response was contemporaneously with the first time it was used liturgically. I'm sure there was an innovation. So part of this is and I think it's, like you said, it's important for those of us, or whoever can get upset when things change and really just wants to hold on to the way that things were before. It's important to remember that there is organic development, and organic development doesn't happen imperceptibly. That's not what organic means. And authentic development doesn't necessarily happen imperceptibly, so that at no point is anyone, the Tridentine Mass was codified through the suppression of all these other rites. So it's, at that time,
Right.
a lot of people were really unhappy because of what was being suppressed. Anyway, okay, so there is a mysterious interplay between the Holy Spirit's inspiration and guiding the church through human actions and choices and developments and innovations. We don't really have to worry about that in a sense, because like from where we're sitting right now, the organ as a liturgical instrument is well over 1,000 years old. So that's incredibly ancient. These other instruments that we're talking about, even the strings, right, and woodwinds, we're talking just a couple hundred years where those would be entered. So, very recent, but even to the modern ear, those occur to us as ancient instruments, classical music instruments, acoustic, the violins and cellos and woodwinds. We would think, well, those are old, traditional, So, but where we actually are in the, and those are permitted, by the way, with guardrails put up to make sure that they're not operatic or theatrical or, etc.
Right.
Okay, so but where we are today, we have musical styles which themselves are brand new, historically speaking, and even in the experience of people. Like everyone's aware of and thinks of the band format with guitar, drums, and vocals and bass. That's modern music, right? That's music that people came up with in the 60s or whatever. I'm showing that I have no idea how it actually happened, but like that's a phenomenon that happened, interestingly, around the same time as the Second Vatican Council, right? So, and its origins are therefore like it's a very clear delineation. Like this had a secular origin that was very, very tied up in rejection of authority, that was tied up in the rejection of mastery of your passions, like liberate everything, right? That's where that those instruments are known. That's what they're known for. Now, praise and worship musical style is not always like that, obviously. But it's just the way we're going to receive that music, just the sounds, put the words aside, it's going to be really hard to make any kind of clear distinction between the band style musically in the church and the band style musically in a Protestant church or a concert or a jam session at your house. And again, I guess maybe I was overemphasizing the sexual revolution thing. It's not that that musical style is inherently bad, or if it is, that's not what I'm going to argue right now. It's just very clearly of secular origin.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, and there's also an emotional sort of inhibition release that comes with rhythmic instruments, and that's as old as drums are. I mean, anthropologically, you can go back to the first people who stretched skin over wood. Like, it was for war and sex, period.
That's a great point. Yeah. Now, there were drums in the Hebrew temple. So
I mean, David messed everything up.
David wasn't wearing a lot of clothes when he was dancing in front of the ark.
He was running.
We can't go and just
tambourines. Come on.
Yeah, but the Hebrew temple, they had drums, they had
Yeah.
strings, they had brass, they had probably the hurdy-gurdy, they had kind of a proto-organ type thing too. So I mean,
No,
there's
that's
gonna
true.
be different things, but it's a good point. I mean, the way that we experience the structure of a pop song or a band song with the whatever you would call the structure, but where there's a gradual building of the tension, right?
Hmm.
And then it reaches a climax, and then the bass drops, and then there's this great release, and it is absolutely sexual, and not necessarily in a bad way. I'm not saying sexuality is a beautiful thing, so it's not like that's bad, but if that's the emotional psychological thing that's happening, well, guess what? That's just not what we're doing at mass.
Yeah, it's
That's
just
not
not. It
the
doesn't.
thing
It
that's
doesn't
happening.
match. Yeah.
Exactly. And it produces confusion. I think the fact that people want to then write that we want to have our favorite praise and worship songs, we want to have that emotional experience in mass, it just goes to show that we've confused what the liturgy, what the public work is that's being done during the mass. So that's kind of a long way of saying the church requires that there be. I mean, it's very legalistic in the way that the church says it. So it's just never done this way, basically, in the church today. Even though I think it should be that music ought to be a cappella or the organ is permitted. But there are times when the organ is not permitted, like for example during Advent, not permitted. Except now that maybe if under these very constrained circumstances, if people really can't sing, you can kind of help them with the notes, sort of a thing. But there are even times where there are to be no instruments. So the church is already the kind of institution that's going to legislate carefully what's permitted and what's not. She doesn't explicitly ban the piano, but it's sort of ostentatiously unnamed among the list of permitted instruments. And
Pius X did. I mean,
Pius
that
X did.
interesting
No, that's
enough.
right. That's
He actually did.
So then that's a good point. That was never changed to my knowledge. So other things were explicitly changed. Women may sing, obviously. Although it's not preferred, it's only when absolute sort of when truly necessary that there should be a women only scola. Right. So there's different things like there. So Pius X did ban the piano, and then what's repeated over and over again is music instruments that will be interpreted by congregants of goodwill at face value as secular, as belonging to non-sacred musical styles, are not permitted, and that instruments other than the organ are only permitted under the direct direction of the local ordinary. So the idea would be the bishop would be involved in setting these norms, and so to a certain extent that means that if we have a bishop who, I think at Bishop Dolan's installation mass, they had mariachi. So to a certain extent, that's our local ordinary setting the precedent that that's permitted. And so he has liturgical authority in this diocese. So that's to be, that's to be taken very seriously. And I don't think it's appropriate to run to a church document and be like, it's an abuse. Maybe it is, maybe it's not, but just that we should take seriously the authority of the local ordinary to set these kind of liturgical standards. But then that means there's a lot of responsibility there for the bishop to follow what the church has been teaching.
Right. I mean, enculturation is a whole nother can of worms that maybe we don't want to get into tonight, but it's interesting. I think you said it well. It's up to the local ordinary to determine what that means.
Yeah.
And maybe he's right, maybe he's wrong. Where we come in is obedience to the church, obedience to the local ordinary. But even within that, we can still make these little tweaks. For example, like it would be very jarring to have no organ during Lent, for example, even though it's called for. What I do personally is I'll play it, and then as soon as I'm done singing, it stops. There's no improvisations. There's no anything else. So that's at least an intentional shift in my mind. Is okay. It's to support singing. The other thing that's interesting about organ that I've heard anyway is because of the way the pipes work. it's very much like our vocal cords. I mean, the wind blowing through them. So it emulates the human voice, which is why it's for supporting singing. I mean, I've even found this as a cantor. It's so much better to sing with an organ than it is to sing with a piano.
100%. Yeah.
For sacred music, because
Yep.
it does support singing. It supports the congregation being able to find the notes and stay together, especially in a very large congregation.
Yep.
But even so, extending the drums to the piano, I mean, we think of the piano, okay, it's a string instrument. Well, no, it's not. It's a rhythm instrument.
Percussion. Yeah.
Right. It's the hammer is striking the string. So there's still a rhythmic sort of element to it. So it's interesting. So it's like, okay, clearly Will and Thomas hate guitars and pianos. And it's like, no,
That's right.
I actually
We're
love
just
them.
Scrooges. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Like I love them, but I also love the sacred liturgy, and I don't want to be distracted, and I want to enter into the sacred action.
And that's a great point, because that goes to the question of how, what's the most important thing? My mom would always ask this question, and we have this. Here's the battle, because I agree that is of high importance, right? And I think that's what the church is saying too. That sacred music supports and elevates and better expresses the sacred liturgy, but as an art, it's also meant to draw people in and focus their attention on the liturgical actions. Great. So we're in agreement. Therefore, if you're in a parish or in a situation where you have a congregation or yourself personally, it would be jarring and distracting to make a significant change, then it would be, I think it would be inappropriate to make a significant change. And it would be inappropriate, in the same way it would be inappropriate to have a mass where the priest sings nothing, but you chant all the propers. I think that'd be inappropriate, because it's jarring and not integrated. Where my mom and I would battle is, therefore, not just continue doing what you're doing, but as with Will, therefore, make very prudent changes that are calibrated towards continuity of liturgical experience. To the extent that people are at each little step. Maybe like what do you call those prairie dogs? Like maybe they pop up at first and then they go, "Wow, I'm being drawn back to the liturgical mysteries."
Exactly right. I mean, it's got to be about that, like you said, and that's what Floriani exists to do, is to assist people in singing the Mass, recognizing that it's to glorify God and sanctify the people. Those two ends of the liturgy, and that's the ends of sacred music.
Amen. Praise God.
So I think that's a good place to end. So Thomas, anything you'd like to share? Where can people go to learn more about Floriani and
you can tell I'm not good at this interview thing. I should have said this right at the beginning. Floriani.org. Go check us out. So there's we're a 501c3 nonprofit, which means that you can support us and receive a tax donation and enable us to go to parishes and give concerts and sing for masses and sing for schools. This is what we do. This is our full-time employment. So in order to be able to do this work in parishes that want us to come and need us to come, but without having them bear the financial weight of a full ensemble of full-time musicians, we rely heavily on donors to support us. So you can do that at Floriani.org, learn more about our mission. You can also get more information about some exciting things we have coming up, like a pilgrimage to Cartagena, Colombia. So you can sign up to come with us to Colombia and walk in the footsteps of the South American saints and hear beautiful sacred music and hang out with us in Colombia. It's going to be a great time. That's going to happen this summer. And then also in a few weeks, we're releasing our new album, Chants of Deliverance. So we consulted with exorcists from around the country to find their favorite litanies and psalms that are part of the rite of exorcism. And we've recorded a bunch of those. And we have exorcists who are test run, taking them on our test runs in their deliverance ministry. But even if you are not an exorcist, these chants, because they're sacred scripture, because they're the prayers of the church, they have real power if you actively participate through prayer in them. Just have them on in your home. If you want that extra little boost in your domestic spiritual warfare. So check that out. Chance of Deliverance coming soon for our donors. There's an early release. So I think that's about it. Floriani.org. Yeah.
Excellent.
Coming soon
And
to a parish or diocese near you.
And on Instagram as well, Floriani Sacred Music.
Yep.
I just looked it up. So
thank you very much.
I know
Floriani
that's
Sacred Music on Instagram and YouTube, and more coming on both of those. Give us a follow in our quest for 100,000 followers. That's our goal. So that's our first goal.
Excellent. Well, for those listening, thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Go to Floriani.org. Make sure that you contribute, help this wonderful mission, this ministry. It's phenomenal. If you get the opportunity to speak to your pastor, to have Floriani come out, and you can convince him to do it, absolutely do it. I mean, it's just the concert's amazing. The liturgy with this music, with this intentional drawing from the treasury of sacred music of the church, it's something you won't want to miss, and something you can bless your fellow congregants with as well. So Floriani.org. Also go to gooddistinctions.com and make sure to become a subscriber so you never miss anything that we put out. Because good distinctions are the spice of life, and we've found many a good distinction in this conversation. So Thomas, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Will. Had a great time. Hope we can do it again.
Absolutely. Awesome. Talk to you soon.